Hello and welcome back to Joe's Art History podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical with me, your host, and your resident art historian, Joe McLaughlin. Welcome back. It is episode 52. And this week on the podcast, as we're nearing the end of season 2, I'm bringing you something a little different, an episode all about Celtic mirrors and Iron Age treasure. Intrigued? You should be. This week, I sit down with British artist James Handley to discuss something completely unique to Britain, Celtic Hand Held Mirrors, which have been found all over the British Isles. But, I hear you ask, why are these mirrors so important? Well, to begin with, they are incredibly rare. There's only been about 29 or 30 of these incredible mirrors discovered up and down the British Isles. They're also incredibly detailed and complex in their design and build, which, when you think about when they were created, which is approximately between 300 BC to 70 AD, it's beyond mind-blowing. We also know relatively little about them, but what they do offer modern day viewers is a look into British craft and design history and how people in Britain used to live their lives. It's also incredibly interesting to think about where they were found and why they were in such places, which James speaks about so beautifully in the podcast. James also discusses one of the greatest Celtic art finds ever discovered in Britain, the Battersea Shield, as well as some of the biggest torque findings in Britain. This episode celebrates the craftsmanship, beauty and design of these objects and why they deserve to be considered as some of the greatest artworks ever made in Britain. This is a brilliant episode. I learned so much about these beautiful works of art speaking to James, and they're incredibly fascinating, and they definitely warrant a trip to the British Museum where you can find a few of the things that we talk about in this episode. And I would seriously recommend that if you're listening, please do look at the images of these works and look at the show notes for further information. It really is a whirlwind. So, sit back and relax as James and I discuss Celtic mirrors and Iron Age treasure. But we're going to talk about something quite special and very unique to Britain, and that is mirrors. How did you come across these mirrors? What were you studying? What were you doing? And
well, I went through a bit of a identity crisis in about 2018 with my art practice, where I didn't feel anything was going anywhere. I didn't really know what I was trying to talk about. So I kind of went down to the basics of like, who am I? And I kind of came down to English and British. It's and other things, of course, but when you get that, you're like, okay, so what art styles are there that are, of that kind of ilk? And then suddenly you notice all these different things that have kind of been left alone and things. So you got your Celtic crosses, as you were saying, but these ones are amazing because they're just small items that are extremely personal, but they're just very beautifully designed and decorated and things, and it's there wasn't any information about them really. They're just kind of like, oh yeah, this is a thing, let's go with another thing on the other side. So I feel that they need to have their time in the sun, because they've been buried for very long times.
No, and I completely agree with you. And even in like researching for this podcast, I mean, you sent me a fabulous resource called celticmirrors.org, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be like a huge site if I lose my place. But there's only like 28, 29 mirrors on there, because that is how special these are, how rare they are, how little have been found. And because of that, there's really not a lot of information on them. And a lot of it is kind of historians, and I suppose scientists as well, speculating on why they were made, how they were made. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially when you look at when these were found. So some of them are like very recent, but most of them were found like in the 1800s and things like that. I believe there's one in the Netherlands. I'm going to be talking about, but that's in a private collection, and no one's seen it since.
Yeah,
It's just kind of disappeared. but it is a very beautiful mirror. If you were to look at it, it doesn't look like it was made like 2000 years ago. It looks like it was made yesterday.
Yeah, and I would say that
It's,
for all of them actually, but bar
mm,
signs of aging, which obviously give it away, it's
yeah,
when you look at them, these on first inspection, they seem quite unextraordinary. And then when you kind of stop yourself and you say, oh no, these things were made, what, 50 BC?
so it's 50 BC to 50 AD because there's a like a speculation of time. Most of the mirrors were in like 50 BC to 50 AD, but the talk is said to have been 100 BC to 50 BC, which is a very long time before. And that's the British Museum saying that. So I'm going to take their word for that.
They don't have to do their research on things.
Yeah, well, if they've done it, you're going to take it, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's just like you see it and you're like, oh, it's not that special. They've just kind of done two colors and then kind of alternated. But then you look at it and there is a logic. There's forms. There's like almost kind of like mirrored things. All the style is very kind of like triplet way. So like there's three circles, two circles on the top, extremely curvilinear. And then when you notice it, you can start kind of like following it around, and it's absolutely amazing.
It's beautiful. And to think that, and just for anyone sort of listening at home, these images will be on my Instagram highlights reel. So please go along and check them out. But when you say mirror, you know, you might think in your head, it's just going to be this huge big thing, but they're actually these tiny little handheld objects.
Yeah.
And they're so special and so beautiful. So let's talk about the first mirror that you've brought to my attention, so that if I say this wrong, I do apologize. The Desborough mirror?
Yeah, the Desborough mirror, which was found in, guess what, Desborough.
No way.
Yeah, I know, right? In Northamptonshire in 1908, which is pretty early on, but it was the time where you could still find something and kind of take it home with you. So it's quite nice that it's been kept. It is in the British Museum, but it's not on show. And I think that's a common thing. But they found it whilst digging for ironstone. And I'm guessing it's iron, I know that, but like they didn't find any bones and they didn't find anything in it. So it sounds like it was either dropped or like a ritual sacrifice, something that I think I'll go into in a minute with all of these. And it is one of the best examples of Brittonic art in this way, because it is extremely kind of unique in its style compared to other like Celtic and Latin styles, which are completely different to, say, Gaulish and Irish art.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about Pictish to say anything, but that's modern day Scotland, if anyone's wondering. But it's just I'm trying to find the right words, because this is always the hard bit for it, because you're trying to kind of isolate it and say this is what makes it special, but they do look extremely similar, but there is something different in it, because there isn't a overarching pattern. There is a curving form, but there is a kind of like riddle in it, which is hard to kind of decipher. But once you've figured it out, it adds another dimension onto it, and you can see it on all these mirrors. There is kind of like almost an animal in these things, but also it's not kind of, what's the word, attached to any particular animal. It's almost like it's a shapeshifter.
Yeah. For me, I mean, and as we're talking, actually, I'm on the British Museum website, which I'll leave a link to anyone that's listening below, because they have some of the things that we're going to talk about are in the British Museum, and they have a brilliant tool where they've taken really high res photos, and you can zoom right in, and it just makes them totally come alive. And for me, what I'm amazed at is the level of symmetry in these, and that there was an understanding and the craftsmanship, that this was all done by hand. This wouldn't have been made in the way that we make it today. It would have been over a little fire that someone had put together, and there would have been perhaps molds, or they would have melted metal down and then shaped it by hand.
It is absolutely mad, isn't it?
It's
Because someone
yeah.
has sat down
Mm.
with a sheet of metal and has like engraved this with, I mean, the only way they could have like done it is with compasses and straight edges, and there is no straight edges, but you would need that to kind of do this mirrored composition. There are a few, if you were to look at the Celtic mirror thing on that, you can see that there are mistakes, and there are some which seem to be kind of like eyeballed, but they're not the best examples, and that's why I've stayed away from them. And it is rather impressive how well they are like mirrored. Like that symmetry is actually perfect if you were to like flip it over a little bit.
Yeah, it's incredible. And even the symmetry in the pattern itself. So it's not, so there's shapes, but then within the shapes, they filled them in as well. So it's not just lines, there's forms and patterns within the, like when you were little and you used to do that thing where you would take your pencil for a walk on a bit of paper.
Yeah.
And then you would fill in where the lines have joined up and made funny shapes. You would fill it in. It's kind of like that. That's how I would describe it, but beautifully symmetrical. But then they've also got there's symmetry in the design within the infill. So they've got this thing of 3 lines one way, 3 lines another. So 3 lines horizontal, 3 lines vertical, and they've repeated that. And
it's quite that's cool. I think they call it the basket weave engraving, because it kind of does the basket weave. If you were to think about it in that way, like what people would have used is some of the first like art styles would have been like plaiting like reeds together to make baskets. So I think it was trying to put that into the design, but at the same time it does kind of add another kind of reflection. It's like there's a thing in Anglo-Saxon art where it's like chip carving, and that is just playing with the reflections. It's like you look at it one way and then something else pops out. It's in every example, this basket weave. It's everywhere.
So that obviously means that you were trained. That's what it tells us, though, surely, that there might have been workshops.
Yeah, well, some people say from the book that I was reading, it was Alice Roberts, the Celts. It's just like the Celts, and there's a theory that they all came from the same workshop. I'm not too sure about that myself, because I mean they're all over the place. Like we're talking like France. Apparently there's one in Scotland, but it definitely doesn't look like any of them. And then you've got the Netherlands. It's extremely southern Britain, and that side. And if I was to go into the archaeology thing, it's rather interesting to see where these are actually found, because if you were to look at a tribal map of Britain before the Romans came, there was the Belgae in what would be Dorsetshire.
Okay.
And the Belgae are actually what we call Belgians. So the Belgians were in Belgium and in Northamptonshire, and that some people think that they were kind of migrating into Britain as well. So there was like a trade network going on. So, and it is very strange, because you've got the Trinobantes, and Julius Caesar even says all these different things. So we do have a source of that. There is a migration pattern, and you can do that with these mirrors because they're all found in the same areas. It's rather interesting to see these kind of artistic movements, if it were.
Something that I find really interesting, and we haven't mentioned yet, when we say mirror, it's not how we would use a mirror. It's not if we think of what we use today, it's not got that reflective surface or that mirrored surface. It was essentially, so one side is incredibly detailed and worked
Yeah,
in, and then the other side,
it's highly polished. So even though it is brass, you still be able to use it as a functioning mirror, but it has another connotation with it as well. Because the only people who would be using these mirrors would have been people with high status. And I believe the birdlip one was a birdlip mirror, which was another one which is absolutely gorgeous. It was found in a burial containing 3 skeletons of women. So what that kind of says is that like these women were very important, and they could have been, I don't know, druids or some kind of spiritual leaders in a certain area.
And they were buried with this. It's funny because I had read a little, this sort of tiny little bit of information that you can get on each one. It said that they were
it's
saying,
very small amount of information, isn't it? It's mad.
It's so interesting though, but they were saying that these mirrors, because they were so precious, and because they're, even where they're placed on the body in these burial sites, they're kind of like a status symbol, kind of like for men, if you were a great warrior, you would be buried with a very impressive sword to sort of serve you in the next life. And then these mirrors would do the same, because it was all essentially, back then, the only way you could really have a reflection was, or catch your reflection, was in water, and water was like very, very sacred.
And even then you have to look at the mirrors and you go like, oh my god, it looks like oil being dropped on a watery surface. You know, these are kind of almost appropriating water and making it handheld. You know, it's you can see through a container and see the water, but if you had a thing which literally looks like it could be the surface of water, it's a very powerful symbol, isn't it?
If you could like show that you're holding water, something that you can't hold in your hand, like you must have been seen like almost like a witch or somebody that has magical powers, surely. Like that would have blown your mind.
Yeah, so it's either blasphemy or it's an important cultural item that must be valued, you know. I mean, even then you have to remember that a lot of the oldest religions in the world, I think if you had Celtic paganism, which we don't know much about, or Norse paganism, and even Hinduism, all of them, water is extremely sacred. It's an important thing. I don't know much about Hinduism, but like the River Ganges is one of the big things, and the fact that it's a river, I think, is important. From what I've read, like it's likely that these people saw water as kind of like a skin between one world and another. And if you had this mirror, it would be kind of like looking into the spirit world.
Oh my gosh, that must have been terrifying.
Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah, I guess it would have been, wouldn't it? Because you know, this person's basically saying like, I can speak with the dead, effectively.
yeah, my ancestors. But then also interesting, I wonder, because you know how later on in our history, or British history, actually I think in even European history, kings were seen as, they had the divine right of God, like God had chosen them. I wonder if it was like a sort of very early prelude to that, that if you possess one of these things where you could be seen to communicate between living and the dead, that you were, you know, a rightful ruler in some way. It just like thinking out loud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we were to take that with things like Beowulf, like the divine right in that word isn't so much like you are descendant of someone, but you have to work your way to get the things. So like it's like in Beowulf, he kills Grendel and Grendel's mother, and then he becomes
and then he becomes
that's is part of that. But it's all interesting to say that because, sorry, it's a bit of a tangent here, but he actually kills Grendel's mother in water. I don't think anyone recognizes how like mad Beowulf is because he kills something underwater for half an hour.
Oh,
It doesn't make any sense, but it's kind of a good story. But yeah, even then it was like if you had water, like a watery surface, you could like speak and ask for favors. It's like a communication to the gods, to your ancestors. I mean, if we were to go on to things like, yeah, so Chettle Park Mirror was found, I believe, in a mirror in an old like pond, effectively, in 2003.
which is
We
so
call
recent, so
yeah,
recent.
yeah, and it wasn't found in one piece, unfortunately. It was found in several pieces and brought together. But the main like slab or plate was recovered, and it is like almost it's nearly perfect, that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the Desborough mirror kind of looks like it's been like exploded. But then you have like the Birdlip mirror, which is, again, it's really interesting. But what kind of annoys me most about like the Birdlip mirror is the way it was found in 1879.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of looked at the designs and saw similarities to that of like Egyptian art and things. So, sorry, what were you going to say?
No. I was going to say that for me, I think the Birdlip mirror is my favorite because it has like colored enamel in it, but it's again, it's very, very, it's not aged well, shall we say.
No.
But actually comparing the three mirrors now, the Chettle Park one, which you've just mentioned, the one that was found in parts at the bottom of a lake or a river, the main surface of the mirror where where the design is, where it's been sort of etched in, is really beautiful. And the like, it's not even as if, do you know when you try and draw a straight line now, it's quite difficult and it's never quite straight. These lines are just, although curved, just so perfect.
It's, I mean, I keep saying it's insane, but like I have tried to do engraving on things because I try and make jewelry. Highlight on try. But like engraving is mad because you need to get a really kind of like soft metal. Like if you want to engrave, I don't know, silver, it needs to be very fine, and you do lose the details slowly just because of the natural wear. But like if this is brass, like sorry, bronze, it's a soft metal, but it's not that soft. You can still give it a good whack.
Yeah.
And this person had probably one of the calmest hands in all of history. I think, because I don't understand how there isn't like a notch that isn't like, it's like, oh yeah, there you go, he slipped up a bit there.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfection. It's not in any way as detailed in terms of decoration as the mirror we spoke about before, the Desborough mirror, which has got that lovely, what did you call it again? The basket.
Basket weave. I've see, when you see the Chettle Park, and I think it's maybe the Birdlip, it might be Birdlip, one which there isn't any basket weave. If you actually look up, there is a little bit, a tiny bit, and it's not enough to even say that it's even there. But I think maybe it was not finished, or they decided that it actually looks all right and we're not going to bother with it. Either way, it kind of adds another dimension into it, because then you have, instead of like saying this is the forward and this is the back, now you have these two forms which are kind of like jostling for your visual attention. So instead of like say if you had basket weaved it, it looks like that's the back.
Yeah.
But in, I think it's like Chettle Park or the bird lip. I haven't got the images up in front of me. I keep forgetting which one because
I think it's the Chesil Park, because now that I've zoomed in, there's a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit right at the top that has that basket weave.
Right at the top, and again, even if you look at those two mirrors, you can kind of see that they're both very similar in design as well.
Yeah.
So like the center circle at the top and the two circles are very similar in their take, but then I think the bird lip gets a little bit more like elaborate in the smaller bits, whilst the Chel Park is just it's just perfect in its kind of composition. It doesn't need any more. It's
But you're right, it really doesn't. And I just can't believe how old this is, and the craftsmanship that has gone into it. And even the handle is 4 rings, near enough perfect circles. What are the two most difficult things to draw? A straight line and a circle. Tick for craftsmanship.
And I just could do it. It's mad.
And this would have been like freehand. I don't know if there would have been molds or anything like that, but
it was cast. It was cast, those handles, but even then you would have to carve the wax and then put the clay or maybe even a soapstone, I believe, to make it. It's not an easy thing to do, because you get the wax model, and then you have to transfer that into there, and then you also got the flashing of the metal when you cast it. It's an absolute mind. It takes a lot of time, let's put it that way, and you can lose a lot of detail in that process. And it's just rather amazing that there could have been things that were going wrong, but that none of it did. None of it went wrong, and it survived. And I don't think anyone thinks like, oh, he's talking about the ones which did survive, they must have been really durable. Look at some of the mirrors. There's ones which are just basically flakes.
Oh my God.
That was a mirror. No, these aren't durable. They're just very lucky.
Absolutely. And I'll leave a link to that brilliant resource, the CelticMirrors.org. I'll leave a link to that in the show notes for anybody that's listening. It's, like I said, there's definitely under 30 in there, and the variation in terms of how they've kept, which I also think says a lot about the land and where they were as well, that some have completely near enough disintegrated into nothing, and that some are, they look like they were made yesterday, but they have aged a lot better, more like a fine wine than something
where it's like it's green, but it's not a bad green. It's not horrible.
Yeah, it's just oxidized and been in the ground.
But no conservator is ever going to touch it to try and get rid of it and make it shiny again. No. That's how it is now.
No, but that's
sad.
And some things are so delicate. It's kind of like, is it the Sutton Hoo?
Sutton Hoo, yeah.
Sutton Hoo, sorry. So the Sutton Hoo helmet, the original helmet, which is so disintegrated now, but they've done like a modern day render of what it would have looked like in all its glory.
Yeah.
And I have to thank you, by the way, because I have been to the British Museum so many times, and I've never, ever found myself in the Celtic art section, and I don't know why, but it's completely filled with amazing treasures that have been found by detectorists, people that go out with their metal detector and find all these amazing hoards. So it's a literal treasure trove of amazing things that were made and have been left in the ground and forgotten about. But that's something you touched on really briefly, because when we've had a chat before we pressed record, a few weeks ago when we were talking about what we might want to discuss, I had said to you, oh my gosh, like, what does it mean that these things were they dropped or were they stolen? Like, does this show you like how people migrated across Britain? And you made the really beautiful point that, as you've touched on, that these things are burial pieces, and you take them with you into the afterlife. So they are really, really special. and they were very, very important. If you and they're found with lots of other things within a burial site.
Yeah.
Including one thing which I read at the British Museum, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to ask James about this.
Yeah.
Including tweezers, because they seem to think that they used to be able to manipulate the surface of the mirror with tweezers, like a kind of funhouse thing. Like that's what when I think of mirror manipulation. So part of like, is there like a playful aspect to these objects as well as being sacred? Could you have, you know, said to a child, "Oh, come here," and then showed their sort of?
I think it is a fun house kind of thing, because again, the mirrors are never going to be completely smooth. I mean, I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure someone could correct me. But, you know, if you've ever, I don't know, polished something really there, you'll notice that there are little lumps and bumps and things. And when you look at it, it is kind of funny to see that, you know. So I don't see why that wouldn't be the case. I know that the tweezers, if you looked like you'd preened yourself and like looked after yourself, you clearly were using a mirror.
Yeah,
So,
true.
to the very fact that you are kind of like you've got rid of some of your eyebrows, or you've got rid of some of those loose hairs on your face, just shows that you own something that allows you to look good. You know.
Yeah.
So it's another kind of like power play with the mirror, but it's a hard one, because there is both a religious and a secular reason between the two, and the styles that do it, they are simply a tool to kind of imbue an item with some kind of meaning, if it were.
I mean, it's just such a shame we don't know more, and it's something that when I was researching for this, that I came across. Obviously, that we spoke about the Chettledown mirror.
Yeah.
And we've to kind of like try to talk about the artistry and the workhouses or the workshops and what we think. And that I read that the Chettledown mirror was purchased with an art fund. A donation, and you can like click through onto their website to be like, oh, find out more about why we helped buy this. And I click through, and it has that sort of standard information about a piece, and it says at the top, artist unknown, and it just made me laugh, because I was like, well, yeah, like why there's no, because there's no marks that says it's from a certain workshop, although you said that in the book that you're reading they seem to think it was, but it's just there's just so many questions that I have, James.
No, well, it's interesting to think of it not so much as like you know, they're not going to put their initials down on the bottom of the mirror, but if they were to working in a similar style, you could notice that there is similarities. But at the same time, people copy other styles and then build upon them. So you maybe you could see one mirror and then another one. Was it because it was the same person, or is it because the person saw it and was taking that as inspiration to make their own? It's a, you know, you can never find out if it was the same people. But there does seem to be a timeline where all these were roughly made at this point, like 100 to 150 years apart. And it's kind of strange to think of that, especially when you have to remember that in like antiquity, from what I understand, you're the art historian here, so you can correct me here, but they don't really credit artists because it wasn't really a thing. It was more of a, like, you're part of the guild.
Yeah, you know, you're totally right. It's collective effort. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They didn't. And even masonries, like people that worked with stone, it would be the head of the workshop that put his initials in. And there's tales of like apprentices sort of trying to very sneakily carve their name into a part of a wall just to say, oh, I did this, and being sort of dismissed from work because you're not allowed to do that. And it's not about you. You are a collective, if you will, not an individual.
Well, it's much like that, isn't it? Because the
right.
artwork that is being made is not made to kind of show how great you are as a craftsman. It's there to kind of show how powerful a people you are. Because as much as like we can say, oh, you know, this is the old days and these are beautiful items, you know, most of them are there for some kind of social reason. You know, there's a reason why people buy expensive paintings, you know, and it's not always because they like it. It's because it's like, I've got a Jeff Koons. It's like, cool. I don't really like Jeff Koons, but someone bought it and someone likes it. So
and it's a total status. And you're right, it is a ticky box exercise sometimes, particularly with artworks and things like this. But how interesting to think that this is perhaps one of the earliest forms of the power that a possession dictates.
But I mean, going on from the possession thing, it's like when you die and you are buried with the mirror, I think it's important to recognize, especially with the Battersea Shield, it was found in the Thames.
Yeah.
You know, and that one wasn't buried in anyone's grave. It was kind of, I think the theory goes is that it was cast into the Thames as like some kind of offering.
Yeah.
So like it wasn't simply like I'm going to hold water in my hands. It was also like I'm going to give the most valuable thing to the water to kind of help me out. So I mean, there is a humbleness as well to it. Like and again with the Battersea Shield and things, you know, it's a beautifully made object with, as you said, the enamel. It has the red enamel on it. But it was not used for any battles. It was too flimsy.
Yeah, which I find so fascinating. Like, and I had never, and I've told you this previously, I had never heard of the Battersea Shield until we started speaking. And I was talking to my partner tonight about what we were talking about. And I was like, have you ever heard of this Battersea Shield? And he was like, of course I know what that is. It's like the most significant find of Celtic art in the UK. And I was like, okay, that completely skipped me in Scotland, but okay, that's fine. But it's beautiful. And the theories and the stories that where it was found that has sparked off. For anyone that doesn't know, essentially this was, I mean, when did they find it? The 1850s?
1857. So around the same time as they found the birdlit mirror.
Right. Okay.
So
how interesting. And they found it because they were building a bridge essentially over the Thames, and they were dredging up the river in order to sort of put the foundations of the bridge down.
Yeah.
And they found this huge burial site, but they seemed to think it was like a burial site, or it was like the site of a great battle, because there was so many bodies and weapons found. I mean, my gosh, like.
Well, they say that there's a theory saying that it was like the scene of Julius Caesar fighting the Celts.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I've looked at it, and most of the people who are authorities say that doesn't really make sense, because again, why would you have a shield that you can't use?
Yeah,
you know?
But that's it.
So it's a really interesting thing, because it is just a kind of like a vanity shield that they decided to discard. But even then, you know, there are a bunch of other swords and things that they found along with it, and it's similar to La Tène. And if anyone knows about Celtic art, they call it La Tène because it's a lake in Switzerland. I think it's Switzerland. And they found like loads and loads of swords, loads and loads of like jewelry. I think they even found a chariot And what people were doing, they were simply just throwing swords into the water as offerings.
Oh.
You know, it's like, here's my most valuable thing, please take it and bless me. That's what they think. I mean, I'm trying to think of it in a way that is both religious and secular, so I'm not being sarcastic when I say that.
No, no,
It's
no.
just it's a different way of thinking.
Well, and it was a different
It
way
is.
of, offerings have always been part of religion and a part of societies. Like the Mayans used to sacrifice people yearly because they believed it helped keep their land fertile. Just like
Yeah.
if you believed that the water was a separation between one world and the next, and in order to keep the gods happy, you would give them your most precious item, because essentially the
Yeah.
battersea shield is this beautiful decorated shield, and like you said previously, it's so flimsy, like it wouldn't have done anything in the way of protection.
And
in
it's
a
just so well designed. I
battle.
don't
So
think
beautiful.
that it has no wear of any battle on it. I think
Yeah.
that's the important thing to also recognize.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I do want to say about the offerings as well, don't think that the British didn't sacrifice people.
Oh, really?
Because in Scotland they found a place and it's literally called the Drowning Pool. So
Oh, this rings a bell, actually.
yeah, it's somewhere. Well, it's definitely in Scotland. I can't remember where. But if you were to go there, you can see it's just like a room. You can sit in it, and it's about up to your knee. But apparently, it was like they would drown people in it as like offerings.
Oh,
So we're not any better. I think we've all kind of accepted that anyway. But
yeah, no, absolutely. I think I would much rather sacrifice a shield than what I would say myself or a family member. But how interesting. I had read this theory that there's another sort of spin-off from it, that they seem to think that maybe the shield was cursed and they were sort of getting rid of it to sort of rid the family of a curse.
Well, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
Because
yeah.
Yeah, because in Bath, I mean, this is after the Romans came over and made the baths in Bath, but they found curse tablets in there. So like, what's it? One of them was like, this person stole my coat. Please, Diana, may you make sure this person is impotent or something.
No.
They're not nice curses. And let's be honest, that guy was probably out of line, but he just stole the coat. But
it's so
it shows those kind of things. But why would the shield be cursed? I don't know. I'll have to look into that, because that's news to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just like a theory, but I would be more inclined to agree with you in the terms of that it was probably a sacrifice, because I watched this video on YouTube which gives you a very sort of brief history of the shield, and they say essentially, of course, it had to be something that was an offering, because when you go into battle you make shields from wood, so that if it gets damaged, it's not that big of a deal, and it's very easily fixable and or replaceable. But because of the sheer amount of detail that's in this shield, it would just be, and the flimsiness of it, because it's all these different sheets of bronze sort of tacked together essentially. It's really, really fascinating. But then there's another beautiful item which, again, I had never seen. I had seen maybe in like Ireland, but I had absolutely no idea the British Museum was essentially had a wing full of them. And it's that gorgeous torque.
Yeah, the Snetism gold torque. It was found in a hoard with a bunch of other torques as well. Not so elaborate. I think if you went to the British Museum, did you see it? There's like a bunch of them.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So many of them.
There's that one torque though that is made of electrum, which I think is a great name for a metal. It's just which is a gold and silver mixed together, but it just makes this silver metal, and it's like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's mad. It's mad because that is a lot of gold. That's a lot of gold.
And the craftsmanship in this, if anyone is listening and is looking at these mirrors and you think, nah, I don't think that's impressive, like, okay, they could have probably done that. Go and look at this torque. It is seriously impressive. It's like something an imperial emperor would wear. Like, this is what I see.
Yeah.
It's so regal. It's so highly decorative. And it was a necklace. And the series that you sent me, which I link in the show notes below, the British Museum are flipping brilliant at getting their curators talking about the items in their collection, engaging in their collection. And the curator of the Iron Age section in the British Museum, she actually, in order to really fully understand what it would be like to make one of these torques, which essentially is like, for anyone listening that doesn't know what it looks like, it's like a semicircular necklace that has two big hoops at the end. Kind of like, would I say it's what you would maybe put your curtains behind? I don't know.
I would say it's like a horseshoe made out of gold.
Oh, there you are. See, that's it. Bang on, James.
Yeah.
Horseshoe made out of gold. There you are.
It's nothing to do with horses, though. So that's unfortunately not a translation of the item, but it is like absolutely mad when you think about it, because if you do see it, it's made out of 64 individual gold wires, which are then twisted together, like soldered together, and then another 2 terminals, which are hollow. They're not solid gold because that would be mad. Then welded on, and then there's a bunch of punching, and then you got your basket weave designs again. Again, you can see it. This one's more in more 3D.
Yeah.
So when you do see the basket weave, it doesn't have the same kind of effect, because let's be honest, the mirrors are a lot more like a painting.
Yeah.
They're more 2D. So when you see the basket weave, it's like, oh, okay, this is going this way and this way and this way. The basket weaves are a lot more, I don't know, it's like a basket weave, but in negative. So as they've chipped it out, it's not.
Yeah, it's like,
imagine something in reverse, like in negative. The black turns to white, the white turns to black, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've got like embossed and embossed in my head, that sort of reverse raised and flat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like the Battersea Shield in some ways. So most of it was like that. Some of the design is repoussé and chasing, where you hit out a design and then you turn it upside down and then you push it back down to get different like details involved. And that involves a lot of manpower, because not only do you have to like flatten the metal, but you also have to raise it, push it down. So if you want to make it a taper or you want a certain kind of gradient, you have to know where that needs to end. And then you also have to fill the whole thing with pitch. Otherwise, it's basically like what's the best way of describing it? It's like tar.
Right. Okay.
And basically, what it was done is it will keep the shape of the metal after you hit it, so that it can be easily molded, instead of like getting the wrong side. So imagine if it was just air. You can't say where it was going to go unless you filled it up and made it a little bit more malleable using the pitch. I've not done it, and I think my description shows that. So yeah, and then all the other decoration is done with punches, which is again just like a pushing certain like circle designs onto it to kind of again make these kind of things pop out.
I mean, it's just amazing. Yeah. And the British Museum's saying it's over 2,000 years old.
Yeah, it's over 2,000 years old, and it was found because someone was ploughing and it just threw it into a bush. Well, maybe not that one in particular, but like because there were several other ones, they found all these gold torques and they were like, oh God, we found something here.
It's just amazing. And you sort of talking through the process there, the point I was going to make before I couldn't describe how best to sort of describe this torque before you were like horseshoe, is that the curator in the British Museum went on a course and like taught herself how to make these as a way of trying to get into the mindset of someone 2000 years ago trying to make it, but she obviously used modern day tools. And even it's like a 10-minute video, which I'll link in the show notes below, and she's got a blog about it as well, where even she's like, this is an insane amount of, like, you have no idea how much work this is. It's insane. And
it's like you wouldn't do it for any other reason other than some kind of calling to it.
But they were seen as, like, in the blog post that I was reading, like she was saying, obviously, like the British Museum have quite a lot of them, and some of them are really badly damaged because they were necklaces and people would sort of take them on and off, and because they would flex the metal so much, they tended to snap. And we've got some that are like really badly repaired, but they seem to think now that that was the whole, when they broke, it's kind of part of the life cycle of it, and it's not to be seen as something that is flawed or unworthy of being worn again, like it would if a piece of jewelry that we own to do, if it broke, we would be like, oh, it's broken, well, that's it. It just meant that was another part of its life cycle, and they would try and repair it very shoddily just to show that the age of an item, and there was something that there was the age and weight of an item was also a status symbol.
I mean, if you had something really, I mean, you still do, if you have something really, really old, it's like, oh, where'd this come from? You know?
Yeah, true. It's funny that's
we're not in
thing.
We're not in the Game of Thrones thing where everyone's got their family sword, but I mean, if you had to talk and like it had been repaired, but you still had these amazing little details, that would be good. I mean, the thing is it was found in a hoard. So again, not a burial, not an offering, but a choice to place in an area. So I've heard several different possibilities of it. And one of them is, again, an offering, which means that, you know, they were kind of putting them all in to kind of offer them to the earth god or something. Again, we don't know enough about Brittonic, you know, religion for anyone to say anything about it. But it does seem to follow more in regards to like fear. You hide something because someone's coming by and you don't want them to take the most valuable stuff. It's probably an invasion, and some people think that this is a talk that Boudica might have worn. I'm on the fence on that one, because why wouldn't she wear that? And it is in the area of Norfolk that the Iceni were controlling.
See, this for me, when Boudica is mentioned, like she just seems to crop up everywhere. Boudica all the time. Every year there's something new about Boudica going on, because was it not like 4 or 5 years ago they've seemed to think that she's buried under a platform in King's Cross. That's where they seem to think her body is. But
so someone I've heard that. I believe that was actually just the poet who wrote it.
Oh, okay. And I've just fallen victim to it. But I think it's so fascinating, and I never would have thought that that's what someone would do if there was a threat, because it's what you do now. Like if you've got, you know, when you were little and you've got a brother and sister and they're coming to take your toys, you would hide your toys, or you would hide your sweets because you wouldn't want to share them at Halloween, or you hide money in your house and stuff like that. But I just think it's so fascinating that 2000 years ago someone was like, we need to hide this, like there's an invasion like it's just so interesting. I
mean, you've got that with like Celtic artifacts there, but you've also got the Romans where they just have massive coin hoards because they left them and they couldn't come back. But if you want a more contemporary version of a hoard, Samuel Pepys, you know,
Yeah.
He had a wheel of cheese during the fire of London.
Well,
It's
I
nothing
mean,
new.
yeah. So I one of my modules when I studied, so I did art history and history at
Mm,
university, and we had to read his diary,
mm,
and he very famously kept a diary his whole life. And when I read that chapter, or that part of his diary, I was like, I could really get on board with this guy. He hides his cheese, and I think he hid his wine as well.
yeah,
Um, and that was the first thing that he went back, because his house never got burnt, and that was the first thing he checked on, was that his cheese and his wine was okay. I think it's
yeah.
amazing.
I mean, he did other things in those diaries, and it's probably not best to read. A lot of visiting ladies of the night, from what I understand.
Yes,
Yes.
but I think everybody was doing it though. Let's be honest.
Yeah, everyone was doing it, but
Part and parcel of
yeah.
yeah. But
But it's really interesting to think of that, though, because again, they were just kind of left. So that means either they were forgotten, and let's be honest, that is a kilo of gold that's not going to be forgotten,
mm,
or the people never came back, which is actually quite sad.
yeah, yeah,
Where
absolutely.
did they go? What happened? And I
Yeah.
think it's one of the saddest things, because like if you see half this stuff, it survived all these different things, especially in England and Wales and Scotland. Like there's been a lot of wars, there's been a lot of looting, but these have survived for that long, and we found them pretty recently.
Yeah.
It's it's a whole different world that we've escaped from, but I don't think we ever really needed to escape from it. Um,
And I think that also just shows you how special these items are, though, that they've survived things, that they've outlived generations of families and humans and
mm,
civilizations that have come and gone, invasions, wars, as you said, plagues, famines,
mm,
whatever. These have just been very quietly waiting. Um,
yeah, and it's quite sad, because when I was saying about when they were doing the birdlit mirror, and
hmm.
I was like, oh, these have themes of ancient Egypt and things.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I don't know. I was a bit sad about that, because it was like, oh, we're not going to look at these as objects in their own right. We're going to look at it as in a classical sense. So, like, one thing that I personally feel strongly about is that there is kind of like a almost eradication of it, especially with, say, like the Roman occupation of Britain. It suddenly becomes classical. Like
Mhm.
you build statues, you don't make these mirrors, because it's not part of the Roman way of life. You make badges, but they're for your tunic, they're not for anything else. It is a cultural kind of like imperial push out of all
Yeah.
these beautiful ways of crafting. And as much as everyone says there's the Romano British style, it's still extremely Roman.
Mm,
You do have some curvilinear things, but the human form and realism is more important than that, because um, if you were to look at like Roman art against Celtic art, the Celtic art is extremely abstract.
mhm.
There are like animals there, but you have to really look for it. Some of these circles look like eyes. They're looking at you from every angle, and once you figure that out, suddenly it doesn't make sense, because then you follow this, and then this becomes another part.
Yeah.
But then when you look at that one compared to Roman art, it's it, it's taken away. It's a lot more. We're going to put a statue of the emperor here,
Mm.
and it's going to look like him. I mean, maybe I'm bitter, but
No, but I think
yeah,
it's a great point. It's a suffocation of a traditional creativity, and
mm,
then that has not only have the craftsmen themselves have been driven out, or they've had to go to war, or they've had to retrain and do something else, or whatever.
mm,
Their craft has been buried in forgotten about and not celebrated in the way that it should be, because these things, like you said, the longer you look at these things, and even I've got the torque on my screen at the moment, and I also still have the Desborough mirror, and every time I look at them, I'm seeing a different shape, a different animal, a different suggestion. It's they're beautiful, and
then your brain doesn't figure out is the basket weave the figure, or is it the non-basket weave the figure? Wait, I don't know. It seems to be kind of like undulating between two possibilities, like it can't decide.
Oh, I just love it. They're just amazing things, and it's been so brilliant to talk to you about them. And like, I have to thank you for like opening up my appreciation towards these beautiful objects, which you can see for free in the British Museum, and there's a couple of examples in museums up and down the country as well. But they're just fabulous things. And I've absolutely loved talking to you, James. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me on.
No, of course. I've honestly, it's just so fascinating. Before you go, where can everybody find you and connect with you? Because you're an artist.
Yes, so I do have an Instagram. It is the only way to really get to me at this point at the moment. And that is James Handley Art. So it's at James Handley Art. I might have to spell that out. So it's Handley Art. So James Handley Art.
I will leave a link to that as well in the show notes below, so people can connect with you once they've listened to the episode. James, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast previously. It's okay if you haven't. I shan't expect an answer. But
no, I have been listening. Don't worry. I know what's coming.
You know what's coming. Oh, okay, great. So I always end my podcast by asking my guests the same question, and it's quite a big question. And you can take it as large or as personal to yourself as you want. And my question is, why is art important?
Because it's a language. I think it's a way of communicating without saying anything. I mean, it sounds a bit wankery, to be honest, but it's like the important thing about art is that it kind of gives you not so much an identity, but it gives you kind of like a sense of purpose. So like, you know, when I was looking at these Celtic mirrors, you know, I felt like this is a part of me. This is like something that I have kind of inherited, and I don't know how to speak the language of it. I've been trying to figure it out. And like everything is going there, like every kind of decision you make is in some ways communicating something. So art is simply the way of kind of communicating. Well, communication. It's important to show the art thing. I wish I wrote it down now. I had the whole thing.
Did you? I was interviewed, oh my God, like a year and a half ago for a little magazine, and they asked me that question at the end, and I was like, how dare you throw that back on me? It's such a tough question. And it's one that off the cuff, but I completely agree with you. It was like your answer is beautiful. It is a way of communicating, and it's a way of allowing us to sort of remember civilizations that have like long since gone and ask important questions like, why are these things here? Where did these people go? Why didn't they go with their owners? And actually contemplate on sort of sadder aspects of things as well, and what it is to be human and to have lived through these things when people didn't really read or write, but they could make and teach people skills and learn and leave things
like cultural touchstones and things, like ways of, I mean, I personally think that like language itself is an art. You know, so like I'm personally really into like learning language, not so much perfecting them, but learning languages. So like Scots Gaelic, Welsh. I want to learn Cornish at some point as well.
Really?
Carnoek. But that's all I can say.
More than me.
But like, Scots Gaelic is extremely breathy. It's like ha,
Yeah. Well,
iron brew.
yeah, and it's a shame because we weren't taught it at school. Like, it was something that completely died out. And then there's regional Scots dialect as well. So you have like people from Glasgow speak a certain sort of Scots tongue, which is very it's not Gaelic. It's you sound like you're speaking English, but everything is completely abbreviated, and it's just a lot of sounds. It's an unbelievable thing, and they're trying to teach that and Scots Gaelic at schools now, as a way of like trying to revive these dying out languages. But it's important.
And it's like it's again another like way of communicating. It adds something else. It's like I'm gonna talk about my practice in like a very simple thing. It's like trying to inject the past into the present, and it's not in a way of like my way is better. It's more like this is something that can only add. I don't understand how it takes away, like when people speak a different language and they communicate, there is a bit of conflict in that, but it adds something. I don't understand how it can take away.
Absolutely. And for me, I lived in Germany for a couple of years, and when I moved there, I didn't speak a word of the language, and I still don't speak much of it now, but I became completely fascinated with how they named things and how literal they were, as a language, how literal everything was. Like, they're in things like an ambulance is called a Krankenwagen, so a sick car. Like, I love that.
Krankenhaus as well. I love it.
Sick house. And how literal they are completely fascinates me. But then I also see that and how they feed into society, and how my German friends are. They're very sort of direct, and I love that. And I sometimes think Scots tongue and Gaelic can be very florally, and a bit sort of sounds a bit like a song. And I think a lot of my Scottish friends, when we talk, we kind of sing at the end, like our very sort of natural.
It comes up.
We go up.
But I mean, I personally think, especially in like English, it's kind of like a conflict between the two, of like a floral almost. Yes, I understand English is not really influenced by any Celtic language, but we are also, people of Celtic origin. Well, a very specific people. We're not that anymore. We're not this. Can we all just get along, please? Blah blah blah. But you have like the directness of German, which is where it came from. Like West German is English, West Germanic. But then you also have this kind of need for riddle and kind of magic and things, which is not. It's not got the directness of German, but it's not got the florality of like a Celtic language. It's just got the two, and it's amazing. I love English, but I also understand why people don't like it, because we can't decide how to spell things. But how in some languages things are gendered and are one thing or another. It's completely fascinating. Anyway, James, thank you for letting me having a little rant at the end there, which is
completely.
Go
for it, and I'm going to keep that in because I think it's so true. But thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Hold on, I'm going to put the video back on just to see. And there you have it, another episode of Jo's Art History podcast. Once again, I'd just like to thank James for coming on and speaking so brilliantly about such an interesting topic. These mirrors were something that in no way would ever have been on my radar. So it was so brilliant to give James a platform and have this conversation with him to really give these really unique and special objects a chance for their moment in the sun, as James so wonderfully put it. I really hope you enjoyed it, and like I said, there's lots of different links in the show notes below, and I would seriously recommend that you go on to my Instagram page at Jo's Art History, and if you go along to the number on my highlights reel that corresponds to this podcast episode, which I believe is 52, you will find the images there. As always, if you would like to get in touch, please feel free. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Instagram, which once again is at Jo's Art History. If you've enjoyed the episode and you'd like to get in touch with James, please do feel free. It always means a lot to guests when you get in touch to say that you enjoyed their topic of conversation, and his Instagram handle is in the show notes below. Now, as you may or may not know, we're getting to the end of season 2 of Jo's Art History podcast. We've just got 1 or 2 more episodes to go, and I'm looking for people to take part in season 3. So if you've enjoyed any of the episodes or think there's an artist that we haven't spoken about and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, I would love to speak to you. So please do get in touch via email or Instagram. If you've enjoyed this episode and think someone you know would also enjoy it, please feel free to pass it on to them. It would be great to get as many people as possible listening to the podcast. It would also mean a lot to me if you could leave a review on iTunes or on Amazon, which you can now rate via stars at the top of the page. So you can give me 5 stars out of 5, 4 stars out of 5, hopefully 5. It does take a lot of time and effort to put this together, and it takes 1 second of your time. Finally, I've been Jo McLaughlin, your host and your resident art historian here on Jo's Art History podcast. I've loved bringing you this episode, and I can't wait to welcome you next time to the podcast. Until then, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. Bye.